We've had a lot of fun, Denise and I have, on these sermons we've done since Easter, because we've done something. We've just followed the story from Easter on. So between the two of us, we preached about every single one of what we refer to as the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. And then Denise preached on that story we find at the end of Acts, at the end of Luke and the beginning of Acts, the story, that last moment where the resurrected Jesus is with the disciples and he ascends. And then 2 weeks ago, before that, we preached the story about how Jesus told the disciples, go to Jerusalem and wait until the power of God comes upon you. The story of Pentecost. And then 2 weeks ago, we preached on Pentecost, the day that the Holy Spirit descended upon the disciples while they were praying in the temple in Jerusalem, and the birth of the church. So following this natural progression, we're going to preach on really the only good description we have of the early church. The book of Acts tells a lot about the work of the apostles, but these few verses at the end of chapter 2 gives us a picture, paints a picture of what the early church was at its most vital in the days after Pentecost. And this is going to be a different sermon, kind of sermon for me. This is a teaching sermon, really, because I think it's important for us to recover a theology of the church, an understanding of what the church is and how it functions at its very, very best. And there was a comment made by our bishop that kind of gave me this idea. So we'll get into that here in a minute. Let's read this text. It's at the end of chapter 2. And it's a description of the early church. This is right after, pretty much, it's in the same chapter, Pentecost. Chapter 2 opens with the story of Pentecost, and here we find the picture of the church. So those who welcomed his message, talking about a message by St. Peter, were baptized, and that day about 3,000 persons were added. They devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Notice the multifaceted ways in which the church was expressing itself as a community. The Greek word is koinonia, as a community brought together by God. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. In other words, they just did what communities do. They tended to the needs of those who had less. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts. Here you see the fellowship of the church, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. My interpretation, I think I'm right about this, the goodwill of all the people means the goodwill of all the people in the city of Jerusalem, including those who were not a part of the church. And day by day, the Lord added to their numbers those who were being saved. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't use the screens very much, but I'm going to do this today since it's kind of a teaching sermon. And as I will tell you, there was a comment made to me by our bishop that really prompted the idea for this sermon. What you'll see on the slide on the screen in front of you here is familiar to almost all of you. It's a picture of the house on the corner. You've seen it. We're building the 13th house on the corner out there. 13 houses that have really transformed the Douglas community on the east side of Central Expressway. The first house on the corner, 13 years ago, over 1,000 discrete individuals volunteered to build that house. Through the years, I don't know how many thousands have worked on at least one of the houses on the corner, including hundreds that are not members of our church, but are members of our community and who affirm and celebrate this remarkable ministry. The reason I'm showing it to you is because during our annual conference of the North Texas United Methodist Church, a couple of weeks ago, our Bishop Michael McKee, told a story about going to the house on the corner. He got up one Saturday morning, he went to the post office. That's where he was going. He had to mail something. He said, as I was coming back, they were working on the house on the corner, and so I just stopped by to visit. He said, I wasn't really dressed like a bishop. I had on shorts. I don't think I'd shaved. But he said, I just started talking to them. He was kind of incognito. They didn't know he was the bishop. So he has some funny stories to tell about that. But he said, I was just so impressed with the passion, the history, and the legacy of this program that has changed so many lives, that has literally transformed the community. And while he was there, he heard about the story about Mark. Now, he told this story in his Episcopal dress at our annual conference. Mark, let's show a picture of Mark here. He's been on our bulletin the last 3 or 4 Sundays. Mark was 5 years old when he and his mother, Alma, moved into and occupied the first house on the corner. It was a life-changing moment for him and for his mother and his brother. But through the years, Mark, as happens to so many of our teenagers, he became lost, went the wrong direction on multiple occasions. And many of you have read his story. I'll just summarize it by saying that Mark found himself earlier in the year at a crisis in his life, and really a crossroads. He was either going to walk across the stage as a senior and graduate from high school, or he was going to end up in the penitentiary. Those aren't my words, those are his words. And so the story about Mark is how, already a recipient of House on the Corner, he became involved in Project Next Generation, had a mentor. He started attending school on Sunday, had a coach and a tutor who literally drove him, said, Mark, you will succeed. So it's a long and compelling story, but to make a short one, Mark chose the road that involved crossing the stage and getting his degree. A huge success story. Bishop McKee told that story at our annual conference. I happen to know he told it as a guest preacher at the East Ohio annual conference, and told it this past week at one of our conferences on the West Coast in California. On Tuesday evening, after the close of annual conference, my wife Bobby and I had dinner with the bishop and his wife Joan, and we were sitting there talking about this, and he said, now tell me again exactly how all this works. The story of Mark and these multiple programs that you have, tell me how it works. And so I began explaining to him these programs that are part of our Serving Others ministry, and I'm going to show you the slide here. It'll help you understand it. A number of years ago, Janet Gramone birthed Project Hope, which is a coaching program for adults. Not long after that, we created Project Next Generation, and this is the project that Mark was in, for the children, many of them the sons and daughters of Project Hope recipients, but not necessarily. Then Missy Wilkinson created School on Sunday, a tutoring program that meets every Sunday afternoon during the school year, 1:30 to 3:30. That program is pretty much responsible for getting Mark across that stage. A program called Quincy's Quest that was created a couple of years ago that involves mentoring and tutoring young children, sometimes that come from difficult backgrounds, in 2 of the elementary schools that are in our area. And then with the addition of Laurie Kindig on our staff, who's a degreed master with a master's degree in sociology and counseling. These are 2 of the many things she does. Confident Kids Club, ages 4 to 5, Confident Kids Summer Camp. These are programs aimed at helping children learn social skills that will help them be successful in school and beyond at a young age. And so I was telling the bishop about all these programs, and I'll never forget this moment. He looked up at me and he said, wow, you have created an ecosystem with which to support all of these families and all of these children. And I thought, he just nailed it. That's exactly what it is. An ecosystem of these programs and others, interdependent programs to support these children. Let's look at this definition of ecosystem. A system or a group of interconnected elements formed by the interaction of a community of organisms, in this case, human beings, with their environment. The next day I came to the office and I opened my Bible to Acts, and I read this text that we read a moment ago. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together, had things in common, and their possessions, they would sell possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to those who had need. Day by day, as they spent time together in the temple and broke bread at their homes and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and earning the respect of all the people. I thought, the bishop's word describing the ministries at Christ United Methodist Church is really the best description, biblical description of the church that I know of. It is an ecosystem where we come together for the purpose of transforming lives. What I want to say to you this morning is that transformational change. Most of you know what our mission statement is: loving God, serving others, transforming lives. Transformational change takes place most often and most powerfully through the interlocking and interdependent relationships of an ecosystem or of a church. So this is our theology of the church, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make the case today why the church is as important to our communal life as ever before. Let me just talk a bit about transformation. When we talk about transformation in these ministries, we're talking about three kinds of transformation. On the one hand, we're talking about the transformation of those who are recipients of ministry. Nobody can doubt the kind of transformation that has taken place in the life of Mark. And he'll tell you, he walked across that stage and graduated from high school, went that way rather than that way because of the transformational ministry of this church. So we have these people who are recipients of ministry, but it's extraordinarily important to remember that transformation also takes place in the lives who are the providers of ministry. And I hope you'll be thinking prayerfully about this. Those who provide ministry discover that their lives are changed in remarkable ways. Usually on Father's Day, I'll tell you a story about my father, one of my grandfathers, or my father-in-law was a real character. I'm going to tell you a grandfather story today about my grandson. Missy Wilkinson recruited Liam, who's 10 years old, to help tutor a 5-year-old that's in school on Sunday. This child had gotten great tutoring from adults, but she said, I think maybe somebody about 10 years old could have an impact on him that would be different. And so I went up there to watch this. Liam went up there. It was remarkable. He spent 2 hours with this young boy, and it was a great day. It was a great day. But here's the story I want you to understand. The next day, when Liam went to school, and Liam is not famous for his own deportment at school. Are you following me here? That's an old-fashioned word. When he went to school the next day, on Monday, he came back home with a note from his teacher that said, whatever he did this weekend, keep on doing it. You got it? The transformational power for those who are providing ministry. It made him into a whole different person because he experienced the power of having a positive effect on another human being. And then when we talk about transformation, we're talking about the transformation of the community. Did you notice there in Acts it said, and they had the respect of all of those who observed this remarkable church in the life of the community at Jerusalem. When we came here in 1997 and built the first building in 1997, we were just surrounded by wheat fields. Some of you remember that. Plano was a lot smaller, and as the steel went up, we became kind of a landmark in West Plano. And this happened to a lot of you. You'll remember this. When I'd go around, I'd meet somebody, and they'd say, what do you do? I'd say, I'm a pastor. Well, what church? And I'd say, well, we're building a church at Parker and Coit, and the steel was pretty dramatic as it went up. And they would say to me, oh, the church on the corner. And so we became known as the church on the corner in our community. Then 13 years ago, when we were trying to find a name for the house that we were going to build and brand that program, it was Nancy Wommack in a meeting. I'll never forget this. She said, you know, we're known as the church on the corner. Why don't we call it the house on the corner? And we did. And the point is that the church on the corner and the house on the corner have become ministries that are owned and celebrated by our community. There are community leaders throughout this city of all faiths who celebrate the ministry of this church and the transforming power we've had upon the rest of the city. And we're grateful for that, and we celebrate it. So let me just make 3 points real quickly. I'm going to finish up. The first one is this. When we look at the theology of the church that we find in this second chapter of Acts, we discover that the church, the early church, was organized. It was organized. I have a friend, a colleague, who says, I've shared this before, he says, every once in a while somebody will say to me, he said, they'll say, you know, I believe in religion, I just don't believe in organized religion. And he says, I'll tell them, well, there's no other kind. And there isn't any other kind of religion. Now, can you have a private spiritual life? Of course you can. Many of us do, and they're powerful. Can you have a personal, private relationship with Jesus Christ or with God? Absolutely. But when we talk about the life of the church as a transforming piece of who we are in the life of this community, the church is always organized. What I want to say to you is transformation, true transformational power, doesn't take place unless the church is organized. There's some sociology I'm going to share with you. It's really become clear a lot is being written about this now. You probably don't read much sociology. I do. It's kind of a professional obligation. Back in the 1960s, and many of us came of age in the 1960s, I certainly did, we entered a pathway in America where we began celebrating radical individualism, right? Remember this? In 1960, we said, I just want to do my thing. I'm going to do my own thing. And there's much to affirm about individual liberty and freedom. But the trajectory of that over the last 5 or 6 decades has led us to this place in America where the organizations and institutions that wove together the communities that made America America have weakened, so that institutional trust is at an all-time low. What I will say to you, and I believe this 100%, is that without vibrant churches, organized churches, I'm going against the grain here because I hear so many people say these days, I don't want to be a part of an organized church. But I will say to you that without the transformational power of organized churches, ecosystems that bring people together for transformation, the America that we remember and the America that we dream of will not be possible. The church, the early church, was organized, and it gives us the model for how we are stronger together than we are alone. Secondly, the hallmark of the church is hospitality. You heard it in that description of the early church. It's a happy description, isn't it? You heard it. These people who are giving their lives to Christ, coming together, sharing their lives with one another, opening up their homes, opening their neighborhoods, inviting more and more people. Through the years, I would like to believe, I think this is true, I think others would say this is true, Christ United Methodist Church has been about as hospitable as a church can possibly be. There have been occasions, some of you remember those occasions because our doors are wide open, that people have come through those doors and made people a bit uncomfortable or nervous. But what has made our church such a transforming presence in the life of this community is the welcoming of a Muslim congregation. They came together and worked on House on the Corner. That's happened for the last several years. Prayers were said, hands were held. A church, the doors of which are always open. The community that comes together to welcome strangers and friends alike. The community of faith transcended by the love of God. The hallmark of the church in the second chapter of Acts and the hallmark of a vital church in today's world is hospitality. And finally, the witness of the church can have a transforming effect on the rest of the community. I really have already addressed this. I'll just say to you that, well, many of you remember back in 2005 when Katrina hit New Orleans. And all sorts of people from New Orleans were coming this way. This is a story about transformation and about hospitality. There was ambivalence in many parts of this community and throughout all of Dallas about how to welcome those who were fleeing the hurricane in New Orleans. Our church made a remarkable and courageous decision. We went to the city and to the county. We begged them. We just opened our recreational building over there, the Christian Life Center. We just opened it. We were planning on having worship services there, but we said, no, we begged them, please send us some people from New Orleans. And we built Hotel Katrina. And it was open for weeks and weeks and weeks. And when we finally closed Hotel Katrina, I said at the time that Hotel Katrina, when the history of Christ Church is written, Hotel Katrina will be a pivotal moment when our church was transformed and galvanized into a truly hospitable and transforming presence in the life of this community. What I would say to you as we look at the next decades of ministry in this church, in this community, is that when the history of this city is written, the leaders of this city will look back at what took place on the corner of Parker and Coit and will say, our city is better because Christ was present. The ecosystem of Christ's church was present on the corner of Coit and Parker. Thanks be to God. Amen.